In this video, we're going to look at how to start working with menus and UI elements in Unity. And UI is actually fairly easy. There's a pretty rich system for creating UI elements, buttons, images, sliders. There are ways to lay things out dynamically, such as you might do with a web page, where things can respond to the size of the screen, where things can lay out top to bottom. So there's some pretty nice tools. And UIs can be built so that they appear on top of everything in your screen. This is the default mode. So you would have a 2D UI over a 3D scene. So let's jump right in. We can create a UI at any time by using the right-click menu in the hierarchy and going down to UI, or of course going to the game object menu at the top, which has the same submenu. And let's go ahead, go down to UI, and let's just start with a simple image. So when we create an image, Unity is going to set up a few different things for us. And I'm just going to hit enter to set the image name as image. It's going to create a canvas, it's going to insert our image under the canvas, and it's going to create an event system. And remember that when we work on UIs, we're working in 2D. Currently, I'm looking at this scene in 3D. What I can do at any point is hit this toggle up in the top right to go into 2D view. And then I can always click on my canvas, put my mouse over the scene and hit F, and that will focus me in. So if I happened to be way zoomed in, for instance, and hit F, clicked on the canvas and hit F, it zooms me so I can see the canvas. And you'll see that it inserted an image here within my canvas. So a couple of things to note at a high level. First of all, your elements are always going to be on a canvas, and you can have multiple canvases. So your canvas is simply your space with which to build your UI elements. You're also going to note that inside of the canvas, we have this rect transform component. Things that are not inside the canvas have our regular transform, but our UI elements have this extra stuff. And this is how we're going to be laying things out dynamically. And there will be a separate video that talks about what all these anchors and pivots and offsets and things are that we have available. You can move around UI elements and rotate them and such, just like you do any other element. So if I take the move tool, I can move this around the canvas and you can see the rect transform elements updating. So this will be a good enough way to get started. So we have an image. That image is on a canvas, and if I click on the canvas has a few different properties of its own. So for instance, the render mode sort of tells us what type of canvas we have. We have a canvas scaler. We can make things pixel perfect. There are some options here, and there will be a separate video that goes into detail on all of those. And the last thing that we have is the event system. And the event system gets events from the user. And when we talk about events, what we mean is some kind of input. So a click is an event, a hover over an element is an event, a drag of an object is an event. So our input module here is going to get input from the user, and by default, when you're working on a desktop, that will be your mouse. But this same input module then will work for, say, touch if you're working on mobile devices. So it will treat a click of the mouse and a touch on a mobile device the same way. That then is routed through your event system, and that's what actually sends events out to all of your UI elements. So that determines when my image or my button or whatever is being hovered over, has been clicked, is being dragged, and so on and so forth. So those are the very basics. And let's go ahead and create an interactive UI element so we can see how all of that works. So we're going to go ahead and create a button. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to right click on the canvas so that I'm going to create a child of the canvas. I'm going to go to UI and I'm going to create a button, and you'll see it says Button Text Mesh Pro. That is a button where the text of the button is using something called Text Mesh Pro. And this was originally a third-party product, and it worked so well that Unity just went ahead and bought it, so it's now a part of the Unity engine. So when I click this, it's going to create my button. Huzzah. And it's going to, under the button, actually add a Text Mesh Pro object. When I click that for the first time, you may see a window pop up that says, hey, to use Text Mesh Pro, you need to import a couple of extra assets and scripts and so on. So we're going to go ahead and import those Text Mesh Pro essentials, which should only take a couple of moments. And then you can also import some TextMesh Pro examples and such. You don't need those in order to start working with the UI. Those are just examples. So now we're all set up, and now that we imported that, you can see that we can see our text inside of the button. So we have a button element which has an image, just like our image before. It has a button script, and that's going to manage all of those inputs. So for instance, what happens when someone clicks the button? What color should be displayed on the button when you've highlighted, when you've pressed, when you've selected the button, all these different button states. And then under that, we have a text element. So something that you're going to see a lot in UIs is that very complex UI elements are going to be composed of the same basic features, which are going to be text, and they're going to be images, and they're going to be these little behavior scripts. So if I go back up to the canvas and I create something a little bit more complicated, so let's say we do a slider, and then I'm going to click and drag so you can see that slider a little better. You'll note that it's created a whole bunch of stuff for you, but these things are all images. This one is just a placeholder. Here's another image. Our background is yet another image. And then we have that same sort of behavior script that tells us in the different states what the colors should be, what happens. In this case, we're not clicking on a slider, we are changing the value of a slider. And as a very last step, let's see how this UI actually looks and behaves in the game view. So when we play our game, go ahead and hit play. And the first thing we'll note is that the extents of our canvas, once Unity compiles and all that, are the extents of our window. So in the scene view, if I change the size of my window, you'll note that the size of the canvas itself actually changes. So what you see is what you get. And we see that we have a button, and we see that we can click on it, and we see that we have a slider, and we see that we can drag it. And if we look inside of our canvas at the button, for instance, and we were to change the pressed color to something very bright and obvious, then we can see that in the scene. So we can see that it's very easy to tweak things in your UI, immediately play, and test out. You can do very iterative development on UI elements, which is going to make your job a lot easier. And in later videos, we're going to dive more into how to call scripts or how to make changes in our scene when buttons are pressed or when sliders are slid. We're also going to look into how to actually apply images. So how to import images into Unity, how to turn those into something called sprites, and how to then apply those sprites to these image elements. We're going to look at things like the canvas, what can you do with that, the event system, what can you do with that. There's all kinds of very neat things that we can do once we start building our own UIs.